Hello, everyone. I am Becky Brooks, the head of marketing at Visor, and I am so excited today to talk about the hottest topic in AI and LLMs, and that is MCP servers, or Model Context Protocols. I am here with Visor's founder and CEO, Mike Yaroshevsky. He is excellent at explaining very technical things. I have questions about MCP servers. Visor is actually launching one, and I have some questions. I thought it would be great to share more broadly, as this is such a hot topic that is changing AI. So, hi, Mike. Thanks
Hi,
for
Becky.
joining me this morning.
Yeah, this is very timely. There's a lot going on in MCP land today.
It's wild how this just blew up. I have a couple just 101 type questions, and then I have some meatier questions. But before we get to those, first, Model Context Protocol server, MCP server. What is it, and why is protocol especially so important for the evolution of AI's utility?
Yeah. I'll start back a little bit with some history just to get into why this became super interesting. But when everybody had their Chat GPT moment, maybe I guess a couple of years ago now, at this point, when we saw what these models could do, these large language models that could generate text, it was really interesting because they could sort of write text. But the problem was they couldn't necessarily communicate with other systems and machines because you couldn't control the output to follow a format that a machine needs to understand. And there's been some innovation within, I would say, the last year. I mean, some people might argue that it happened a little sooner, but where you can get these models to speak effectively in a technical language. And really the lingua franca here is JSON, which is just JavaScript object notation, which is just sort of a very simple way of communicating information between computers. Well, now that became possible, that these LLMs could basically communicate with other systems in a very reliable way, the question then became, well, how do you connect other systems to retrieve information into the model so that it had additional context? That's where the C
Mm.
comes from in Model Context Protocol, and then also to take actions. And there were some sort of competing developments here between what Anthropic and OpenAI sort of had in the fall. Anthropic, of course, had the Model Context Protocol designed probably around Q3, Q4 of last year. And now OpenAI agreed to sort of follow the same format, and the race is on. The war is over. We read about like the Betamax VHS wars. I wasn't around for that. But, effectively the standard is set, and now everybody can go full speed ahead innovating for this. And what is it? Well, if the AI is a brain, the MCP server and, well, basically the servers are effectively the sort of the eyes, the ears, how it receives information, also to some extent the hands, how it interacts with things. It's both receiving context, but also the ability to take actions. And it's just pluggable, kind of like, I know some people have used the USB analogy. It's like you just plug in a new peripheral, a mouse, a keyboard, a camera, a microphone, and it just all works because they've agreed on a universal standard. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, and it's pretty wild. I know people have been talking about the future of AI, with AI agents becoming more autonomous, having more agency, actually
Mhm.
becoming like a workforce, so to speak. Everyone's going to have their own AI team working for them,
Yep.
apparently. And without AI agents being able to actually access information and other
Mhm.
tools, I think that vision is probably not achievable. Like the whole last year and a half with AI, the main conversation has been about like prompting and the
Mhm.
differences between the different LLMs in relation to how they generate responses and that kind of thing. But ultimately, like the information you give them is the context that they
Yep.
have. And so this model context protocol is adding a layer between the LLMs and what inputs they can get now. And so now they can go and retrieve information from various tools, which is letting them to, like, I suppose, achieve this lofty vision we have for AI, which is them becoming autonomous and actually
Mhm.
working for us.
Yeah, it's interesting because everybody rushed to integrate AI within their product and ecosystem. Atlassian and Jira has Rovo.
Mhm.
HubSpot has Breeze. Salesforce has Agentforce. The large SaaS apps kind of jumped on this sort of train of creating agents that would work within their own platforms. But while there's value in that, it's almost like the amount of value of hiring an employee and limiting them to only access one tool. That would be such a waste of resources because most workflows, I would argue almost all workflows, require interactions across tools to really make sense of it. And that's where MCP can take us. But MCP is not the sort of solution to this. It is just a sort of puzzle piece that needed to be there so that we could now connect these systems across. So you've got your AI and then all of the tools. I like to joke that it's kind of like everybody was putting the genie inside the bottle, but
Mhm.
that's just so limiting. You've got to let that sort of out of the bottle so that it can work across tools, and that's actually a really hard problem to solve.
Completely. Yeah, that would be like hiring an employee and being like, you're the HubSpot employee and you're the WordPress employee and you're
Yeah.
the, Salesforce employee. But yeah, that's just not scalable or helpful.
Mhm.
And it makes sense that AI agents would need to be working through with various tools. And this protocol sounds like it is a foundational piece for them to be able to do that.
Yes.
But that leads me kind of into my next question, which is okay. So I know Visor, we obviously are launching an MCP server. It's really exciting. I've seen the demo. The vision for MCP servers is your AI agents can work across various tools using MCP server. Now, what our MCP server does is it allows your AI agents rather, to actually, in a very workable way, work with the data in SaaS tools. Why can't MCP servers, just like as they are today, just do that? Like, why do we need our own, and why can't APIs do it? Like, what do we do that's
Yeah.
different than what else is out there?
That's a really important question because there's a lot of misconceptions out there. Some folks thought that the MCP server concept alone just solved this problem. In reality, it's just an agreed upon way of exchanging information. But within that, you still need a lot of focus on something called metadata. Now,
Hmm.
the term meta is sort of like this idea of like it's the data about the data. It's okay, this is a drop down field. What are the choices that could go in that drop down field? This is a number field, but should we interpret 0.25 as 25%, or should we interpret that as a currency or as a number? For these apps, these SaaS apps, there are often really strict rules and complicated structures that teams build into them as they effectively install their own business logic into these products. It's one of the reasons why these products are so sticky and have become so successful
Hmm.
is because these companies put all of their business logic into these systems. Now that just makes it really hard sometimes for humans to reason about. That's a different story, but certainly for AI to reason about.
Hmm.
And while MCP provides sort of like a basic foundation for exchanging data, it doesn't explain to the AI how to fill that data in and what sort of context to use to interpret data that it receives. And that's where you have to add innovation. And that's what we have basically a decade of experience doing is we were originally building integrations for humans where the humans needed these bumpers of, okay, it's a drop down field. We're going to show you the choices. Now, APIs were traditionally built to be integrated at development time by software engineers who could read the documentation, which is rarely fully complete, look up questions in online forums, go through trial and error, and try to build things that would repeatably work. That's how APIs and sort of developer-focused integrations sort of came about. Now, the problem with that is MCP happens at what's called runtime. I'm trying to not use too many technical terms, but there's a difference between effectively hooking up APIs at develop time, where you're like, actually writing code and running through the patterns and scenarios, versus MCP is really just plug and play. And the AI has to understand at runtime how to make those calls. So you have to give it a lot of instructions. And that's where sort of this magic metadata layer that we've been working on helps, where we've created these bumpers for humans that are perfect for AI. As the sort of AI development moves more towards human capabilities, it also benefits more from things that were built for sort of human comprehension, like the technology we have.
Yeah, that makes sense. Also, I'm in New York City, so if you hear any sirens, apologies. But okay, so it sounds like integrations are far more nuanced than perhaps the conversation around MCP servers has been alluding to, and that each and every like enterprise SaaS tool has its own logic and way of doing things, and that's not interpretable with just an AI agent reading through the API documentation.
It's not sufficient.
Okay.
From a team that has built integrations, you could take our word for it that I've definitely seen some companies popping up that are trying to use AI to build integrations by reading documentation, which is such a utopian perspective. It's a naive perspective that the documentation is up to date and accurate. I can't tell you how many times the documentation has either lacked data information that it needed, had outdated or inaccurate data. And this all gets to reliability, which is the core benchmark for whether AI is something companies will be able to actually deploy and trust. You have a certain level of trust with human employees because human employees are relatively intelligent, can reason about things that they don't understand, can ask questions when they, AI is different. AI is sometimes overconfident. It just does things and figures out whether it was right later. But it's just, you wouldn't have a human that you could only trust 60% of the time doing a job. At that point, it's not even worth doing it. And that's sort of the level of accuracy and reliability that some AI deployments today are having, which is just too low, which is where you have to get to. How do you improve the reliability and accuracy of the models so that you could actually trust them, so that they get to that, whatever that threshold is, 99.9%, at least better than humans.
Yeah, you brought up two topics just now in your answer that I'd love to dive a little bit more deeply into. I'll get to the reliability topic. It's related to this idea also of a utopia. Like, I know in general, I've been working at startups now for 17-ish years, like a long time. And I've seen this proclivity for this tech optimism. When there's new technology, it's kind of like when social media first came out, it was just like, oh my God, wow, we're just going to democratize voices and we're going to be connected as a society. And very like 2008 era, there was just an unbridled enthusiasm around what this technology could do, and less so like the underbelly that now a lot of times we are dealing with. And again, I am very bullish and excited about AI, so I am not poo-pooing it, but I am seeing this kind of like same type of enthusiasm and optimism even, and I get why. I mean, this is like a huge seismic shift that is going to alter how we all work. It's going to make massive companies in the future. It's going to potentially ruin other massive companies who don't get on the train in a right way. So I totally get the optimism. But to your point about like reliability, I think that the conversation around AI has been very fixated on its potential and its capabilities, and less so its reliability. And so I guess I'm just and now with MCP servers integrations being in the spotlight right now, I'd love to hear your perspective on how the conversation around AI is going to evolve around reliability and what this technology is going to actually need to fulfill this optimistic view that we all have about it.
Here's a great sort of sector that's I would say a couple years ahead, where we might be able to predict where AI is going. Think about sort of self-driving cars, the technology there. I remember the amount of optimism in 2015 was through the roof about how quickly the self-driving technology would be, if we'd be sitting back on our commute to work. Um, Very few of us are actually doing that today, with some rare exceptions, even though Waymo, which is, I think, probably the furthest ahead of the pack, has at this point fully exceeded sort of the safety thresholds or metrics of human drivers. Um, the standard is just so high when we move from humans to robots. People expect more, and it's really hard to sell somebody on uh, even a human level. Ironically, even a human level of proficiency or safety or reliability. People just expect more, and so that just raises the bar so much higher before folks are going to be willing to trust AI to do things for them that have consequences. Maybe you'll trust AI today if the reliability isn't very high for certain things that aren't super critical. Like, I get tons of emails from the AI BDR software where they just, make tons of mistakes and it just doesn't make sense. But okay, one customer out of tens of thousands on their list, not a big deal for them to be sort of messing that up. But if you're dealing with paying customers or actually, you know, putting information in your sort of books per se, like, upgrading accounts or managing money or sending communications that are critical, you expect a higher threshold. It's just sort of how we've shown our preferences as an industry. And so this is the big problem today. If you go set up agents, there's a lot of great tools out there that you can go build them today. And I encourage everybody watching to go try. You'll find that it's easy to do the easy things. It's almost impossible to do some of the harder things you might want to do, because it's just not reliable. I've gone and set up, I'm not going to name names, but I've used a product that's a very popular integrator, and they have this agent builder, and I've connected it with another really popular SaaS app, and it's just routinely failing to make updates in that app because it's just not coming up with the right data to send, despite the fact that it has all of the API documentation, knows exactly what it should be doing. It just can't figure it out sometimes.
Yes, I hear you on that. It actually reminds me of an article entitled AI Agents, Less Capability, More Reliability, Please. And the writer of it goes into how they wouldn't trust AI to book them like a airplane flight because
Mhm.
they would have to be the one that has to brunt the pain of something going wrong. And the article is pretty succinct. It's not even that long, but it just goes into, I think, the topic that we're talking about right now, which is this fixation on capability and perhaps an oversight on reliability. And I think for also AI to continue to achieve its potential, I don't know if you saw yesterday the Shopify CEO memo note that went viral on LinkedIn, where essentially the mandate is like, do not hire more people without first scrutinizing whether this can be done with AI. And so that's a lane that's certainly happening. And I think as companies look to be more efficient and all that, they'll be looking to lean on AI more and more. But I don't hear as much this conversation around how reliable it is. And I think for these large companies that are betting on AI for their future to still be profitable, reliability has to be at the heart and the core of what they are delivering.
The problem is reliability is not sexy.
Huh.
When you put out memos like that Shopify memo, you're going to get a lot of attention. How true to that are they actually going? I don't know. But when you say these sort of, wild statements about, in X years, nobody's going to be writing software by themselves anymore or at all. We're just going to be giving it to AI. Those are the statements that make headlines, draw attention, draw capital. So there's no surprise that people are making these statements, not because they believe them necessarily to be true, but because they're the statements that they need to make to achieve some end. In reality, these efforts behind the scenes are not nearly as successful as they would like you to think. And there's a lot of work and scrambling being done to try to clean up the messes and figure out the interconnectedness to make this vision that folks have a reality. That's not to say it's not a worthwhile pursuit, but I think that the exaggerations aren't really doing our industry a ton of good, because it just creates higher expectations than the technology today can meet. So reliability is where the rubber meets the road on this, really, is the companies that figure it out are the ones that are going to succeed here, because having a flashy demo might get you the sales meeting, and it might even get you a signed contract, but it's not going to get you the renewal, and it's not going to get you that long-standing relationship. And as we're seeing potentially the demise of the per seat software as a service subscription model and moving towards something that I believe I'm hearing across the industry right now is generally going to move towards a consumption or usage-based model. Maybe, amount of CPU you've used or processor time that you've used. You have to deliver a service that people will continue using in order to succeed. That's going to do some very interesting things for the industry, because whereas there was a high degree of reliability on the per seat model, and in fact, a ton of breakage, meaning people who didn't use some of the seats they were purchasing, when you have a usage-based model, if your product is not getting used, your revenue is going to be a lot more volatile, and that's going to be a major problem. So building technology that folks can rely on and move their workloads onto is really, really important. And if I think those are probably the conversations happening behind the scenes within most organizations. And I imagine that we're going to, as an industry, perhaps develop more standards around what that means, so that there's some form of I want to say interoperable, but like comparable metric between reliability of agents by company X or by company Y.
That is wild, the whole potential demise of the per seat model and erring more toward usage. And I think that just underscores the importance of reliability and utility. For me, when I look at AI, it feels in a lot of ways very destabilizing right now where we are. Like it's giving me very 2007, 2008 energy of when cloud computing was just starting and everyone was imagining what the internet would look like with this new technology. But it feels even more destabilizing than that. Like and the clip at which the technology accelerates is faster. And so what I'm seeing is a lot of these very large companies are attempting to find their footing in this kind of destabilized environment where no one has it completely figured out. Fortunes will be made. Yeah. Fortunes potentially will be lost if you don't get this right, because it is inevitable that AI is going to alter how we all work moving forward. And the bets that people make, honestly, in 2025, I feel like are going to be the bets that make or break so many companies. I'm just curious, number one, do you agree? And then number two, what's your opinion on how these larger companies are kind of dealing with all this right now?
People are scared. People are very scared, because you're right, this transition is massive. And if you have built a business on the per seat model, and you whether economic storm clouds driven by what's going on macroeconomically are driving down the number of workers in the workforce and therefore licenses that are needed, combined with a shift towards more and more automation and AI agents doing things, you're looking at either unremarkable growth or contraction in businesses that have a per seat license model, which Wall Street does not like businesses that were growing and stop growing or start contracting. So you've got to find new places to grow revenue and potentially transition off. Now, cloud ended up being very profitable and successful for those who did it well. I think one company that comes to mind to me is Adobe. They did a fantastic job moving towards the cloud and building a really substantial revenue, recurring revenue stream from the model that they had. It's possible to make these transitions, but it requires courage and conviction. And I think what we're going to see is a lot of the larger players are either going to be innovating or acquiring their way towards having dominance in these markets so that they can continue to find areas of growth and innovation. It's the classic innovator's dilemma.
Do you foresee that a lot of these larger companies, their AI play is going to be that like genie in a bottle that you talked about, where it's the AI agent within? Or do you think that in order for the utility and the usefulness of a SaaS app to still be relevant, it's going to have to work with other tools? Because right now it does feel like little fiefdoms with a lot of the SaaS tools.
Well, I'm talking to some companies and founders and executives at companies that believe that SaaS as a concept is only going to have a very limited lifespan, where if you boil them down, they're databases with workflow and UI. And there's a vision some have where all of that data is just stored in a format that the AI sort of places the data in and can retrieve it out, and we move off of SaaS apps entirely. It's a very dramatic vision. It's possible. There's some really interesting ways you could store information for the AI to retrieve it, and I think that we're only going to continue to see developments there where you're just talking to a SaaS app, whether through voice, whether through text. I think a lot of folks make the mistake of thinking that textual interfaces are better than graphic interfaces. I did a senior thesis in college on the psychology of user experience design. I could tell you that's a grave mistake. Our eyes and our brains were developed in a way that make graphical user interfaces very important, but that could mean dynamically generated graphical user interfaces by the AI for just what you need in that conversation. That's one path that this could take. That's the sort of I don't know, but I don't want to say black swan, but that's just a very different way this could go. But until we get there, or if we don't get there, there's two possible paths to your original question, where you either have these genies in the bottle breaking out and also having access to other tools. And then we have a sort of battle between these larger players of where are you going to consider your home base for doing work? Let's say, Atlassian's Rovo has the ability to now interact with your entire stack, and you could do all of your work from inside of Atlassian. Well, Atlassian's going to try to pull you in. This is a big part of their strategy. You can see it from last year's team conference. This year's going on right now as we're recording. Impossible alone is their sort of like, big idea of hey, you got to pull things in, people and systems, but they still want to be your hub, your home base. And so that's one way in which one of the spokes, one of the major SaaS apps becomes your home base for then interacting with the others. And that's one way. The other way is you have an entire new category of companies and products that are sort of the hub with all of the spokes. You have these new automation players popping up or AI players popping up where that's your primary way of interacting with all of your tools. That's the riskiest for the major vendors, the SaaS vendors, because if that comes into reality, then those tools are disintermediated from the relationship with their customers. You're no longer logging into Salesforce or Jira or Asana or HubSpot or name your ServiceNow and name your SaaS up. You're just working there. And over time, they could pull your loyalty out where they could flip a switch and you wouldn't even know whether you still had that underlying SaaS app. That's the other potential future. I think there's a lot of money and interest that will work against that because of how disruptive that will be for the reasons I described. but that's another potential future here, which is that you have one sort of vendor or one place you go to do your work, and it's just orchestrating these other apps.
Wow, I will be so curious to see which one wins, but it sounds like ultimately the punchline here is that this shift toward usage and becoming that hub so that your usage increases. So if let's just pretend like Atlassian becomes the hub and they have the most useful AI in the sense that it can work with other apps and it can pull data in from other places. My organization's going to be paying Atlassian more.
Yes.
Because my usage of their AI has increased, even though I might be using their AI to access like GitHub data or HubSpot data or whatever type of data I'm accessing. I'm still using I'm logging into their app and I'm paying them for their AI processing power, essentially.
Exactly. And to access the other SaaS apps, that of course depends on how well they can integrate, which is why, as we sit here today, Visor finds ourselves in such an interesting spot in the market and timing in the market as not just a company that's built integrations, but a company that's built the types of integrations that both enable these apps like Atlassian, if they're trying to build this, which I imagine all of them to some extent are, to some extent know they are, you might need in your UI to display information from these other apps, because you can't just sometimes refer to it in text. It's not the best format. And so you need tools for rendering the UI from other apps, and you need tools for making sure that your AI understands the metadata of these other apps so that it can be more reliable and dependable and accurate at interpreting it and understanding it. I'll give a very specific example within the Atlassian space. The API for Jira generally communicates in numerical IDs for things that in the UI of Jira, you're dealing with labels of statuses, let's say, to do or done. But the APIs don't use English words or whatever language your system is set up, and they don't use human words. They use IDs, numerical IDs that then get resolved. But AI can't interpret what status 1010 means. It's just a number. That's where the metadata becomes really important. It's, that's to do, that's done. So you need this translation layer for the AI to reason. And that's what I think is one of the most common misconceptions is, we've got integrations. We've been doing bidirectional integrations, for 5-10 years. Well, have you been doing the type of integrations that AI can use?
Very interesting. And I think 2-3 weeks ago, OpenAI officially, Sam Altman officially announced they are adopting the MCP server technology that Anthropic officially announced last November, but obviously was working with prior to that. And I think that speaks to like, if OpenAI right now, the largest player in LLM, I think they gain like 2 million users an hour or something like that. Their growth is crazy. If they're adopting this MCP server, this protocol, it's obviously on an existential level important for their relevancy moving forward. Otherwise, they're just going to be pigeonholed into like a text prompting software and not where AI is obviously going, which is this vision around autonomy, agency, this little army of AI agents that you have to be able to work for you. So yeah, it makes sense that these large players, these established large players, such as like Atlassian or Asana or, whoever, are also similarly probably following that same line of thinking.
Standards are really critical to all industries, especially within sort of the technology industry. I mean, I've done a lot of DIY stuff around the home, and I've been surprised to discover that there are standards in things that I didn't even expect there were standards in related to plumbing and HVAC. And it's just really fascinating. And the fact that OpenAI has adopted the MCP sort of standard means that now more innovation can come and have a greater benefit. I mean, you go on some forums that I look at, and it's just new MCP servers are popping up every day. Now, what is an MCP server? I should break this down because I don't think we really described it, but you have this difference between the clients and the servers. Just like, today in web, we have client is your browser typically, and the server runs on somebody's, I don't know, server farm, could be AWS, ours are in Virginia. But you've got this communication between what the user interacts with, which is the client, and where the information sometimes gets crunched or stored, which is the server. And for MCP, the client is typically the textual interface in which you are communicating with the AI. In our case, our demos currently run with Claude Desktop. That's how we use it. But that's just one place. There's now integration with VS Code and Cursor, and you're going to get all of these new tools that are now on either side. They're either consuming they're either consuming tools, basically they are clients, or they are providing tools. But it's kind of like if you think about, I don't know, Mr. What's the guy, Mr. Gadget, Go Gadget. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Totally.
Yeah, it's, you get all these little plugins of things you could do. Go Gadget helicopter, and his hat pops up. Like that would be an MCP server. That's a capability, that you now have, and so adopting that standard, very important for folks on both sides to now be able to play. This is the year. Back to what you said, 2025, pivotal year in every sense of the literal meaning of that word. Everybody has to make a lot of changes to adapt to this world. I know a lot of companies are questioning, their roadmap and how do they adopt this. And you want to be ahead. You don't want to be behind on this.
Totally. Yeah, I know I've heard this phrase inflection point throughout my entire career in tech, and this is certainly an inflection point. And not only is it an inflection point, but I feel like the time span of the inflection point is like a millisecond compared to in previous seismic shift type of trends. It felt like you had more time to grapple with what this means and even pause a bit and see how it plays out. And here it's kind of like, you gotta act. You have
innovation is diffusing faster and faster. If you look back, as I have, at sort of the history of some innovation diffusion, the radio took a long time, television a little bit quicker, personal computer a little bit faster, the internet a little bit faster. And to me, it almost goes in like the reverse Fibonacci sequence. Everything in nature tends to follow certain patterns. That's one of them. And you kind of, the Fibonacci eventually gets to one. The singularity, things are just happening almost immediately. And that's, I think, where we're approaching. Everything has gone so quickly. Some of the most recent innovations spread within 3 years, 5 years. Now we're at like 1 or 2 years for most new innovation to catch on.
I would pay money to be a fly on the wall at large companies that are grappling with this existential question, which ultimately, I do use that phrase intentionally. I do think it's an existential strategic moment for companies and how this will play out. I know some companies will not be as relevant in 10 years. Companies that it's unfathomable that they won't be as relevant. And other companies are probably going to pop up and you're going to be like, oh, damn, that one. So it's one of those moments. It's the wild, wild west. I love it because to me, this is why I love working in tech. It's people who have a vision and the vision sticks and we stick the landing and you're actually kind of establishing the new modus operandi for how people function in this world. But I think there's a lot of lack of clarity right now. And just because you're a large established player does not mean that you possess any more clarity than anyone else necessarily. So I am very intrigued by how this is going to play out. I'm also very excited by our MCP server. I know I've seen the demo, how useful it is. And I think the fact that our integrations work for people first, it then parlays really well into AI agents being able to actually use this data and fulfill our vision for these AI agents to be these autonomous workers. So I'm super pumped for the future of AI in general. And then I know that Visor is going to have a really, really cool play into how all this plays out.
Yeah. Thanks, Becky. This was it was fun to chat about. I appreciate the good questions. There's a lot happening, and even we're discovering it. Many people are inventing things as they go to figure this out and build it. MCP as a standard is still relatively immature, but I think we're all in the industry figuring out how to use it, and we're going to be pushing it to the limit. And I bet you it's going to evolve as time goes on.
Super exciting space. Thanks, Mike. I definitely have a lot more clarity around many of these topics, and I hope you do at home, whoever's watching this on YouTube. Thanks so much for tuning in, and drop a question in the comments. We might do another one of these in the future with some more questions, because the space, it just keeps evolving. I feel like we're going to have to talk again in like another month or so, and everything is inevitably different. So thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time.
Thanks, Becky.